Hello, this is Brian Rowe with Mythic MTG Tech. I'm doing a deck tech today on the Legacy deck, Death and Taxes. It is a great deck, very solid, playable, competitive, tier 1 deck in Legacy. It's a little weird compared to other Legacy decks as it plays extremely fair. It puts creatures into play, it attacks with those creatures, and it responds to your opponent's threats. It is a difficult deck to play. There is a lot more going on in this deck than most people realize. I've seen people pick the deck up, lose several games with it, and put it down because the cards themselves have a lot of interplay and intricacies for a mid-range deck. Now, you're probably wondering why I say this is a mid-range deck, because the casting cost is so low on it. Legacy is a super fast format. And if you've got 2 and 3 casters that are solidly doing your attacking and very few 1 casters, you are more of a mid-range deck. You're not a combo deck, and you're playing fair compared to the aggro decks that are full of 1 casters and just try to reduce your life total to 0 as fast as possible. I'm going to go through each of the cards in the deck, talk about why they're in there and some of the tips or tricks for using them. Then I'm going to go through the sideboard, and I'm going to finish with a few budget options, as this deck used to be considered a solid budget deck. It is now one of the more expensive decks, although for tier 1 it is definitely not that expensive compared to those packing Underground Seas. Let's start with Mother of Ruins. This card is just amazing. 1 casting cost, the protection ability is what makes this card wonderful. The card stops Swords to Plowshares and even Abrupt Decay. Very few cards out there have so much utility. This is the type of 1-drop that you really want, that can really lock you into a great long game against decks that are heavy on removal or decks that are going to try to deal with your creatures directly. Against combo, this ends up being a much weaker card. There are some situations where I would even consider pulling it. Play the full set here. Do not cut any of these. They are wonderful. Swords to Plowshare is simply the best removal in Legacy. 1 casting cost, exile is amazing. The life that you give your opponent really doesn't usually matter in this deck. Yes, you are going to be attacking and beating down with creatures, but you have a lot of interesting ways to get an advantage. Don't worry about the life. Take care of their major threat so that you live. This is the artwork that I like the best on Swords to Plowshares. I need to pick up some of the From the Vault ones. Phyrexian Revoker is one of the more skill-based cards in this deck. Knowing the other decks that people play in Legacy is essential to playing this card well. If you draw this against a black deck and you don't have any cards in hand except this, you're often going to put this out and name Liliana, because if they pull a Liliana and make you discard this, you're going to feel really unhappy. Knowing which cards shut down which decks is essential here. You want to look through the top 8 from the last few Star City Games lists and see what cards with activated abilities you can shut down. Deathrite is one of the best targets for this. Jitte is another wonderful target. Jace, any Planeswalker out there, very, very good targets. I'm running 3 here currently. I've seen lists go up to 4 on a budget list. I would consider putting a 4th in. Thalia is what really turned this deck into a tier 1 deck. Thalia slows Brainstorms and Lightning Bolts down significantly. With the amount of mana denial and control that is in this deck, you can often lock people out for the few turns you need to get through damage. Thalia is an early game win against Storm combo also. This is one of the cards that I'm really happy to have in my opening hand. First Strike matters a little bit, but the fact that she's legendary means that you can often protect her with a Karakas. Spirit of the Labyrinth is another good utility card that just increased the power level of this deck. Spirit of the Labyrinth, I don't usually just run them out there. This is a card that I use with Ether Vial to try to sneak them in response to a Brainstorm or a Ponder. If you can get 1 or 2 card advantage out of this, even though it's a bit fragile, it is well worth it. One other important thing to note on this card is that it only affects the second card drawn on a turn. I've got some card draw in here also, just in the form of the Future Sight land and Horizon Canopy. Make sure to use your Horizon Canopy on your opponent's turn if you've got Spirit out. Otherwise, your Spirit is going to nombo with your Horizon Canopy. Aven Mind Sensor. This card is a powerhouse. Everybody uses fetch lands. When playing against Jund, this can shut them down late game. I really, really like this card. It's also very good against combo. I would consider playing more of these in a budget version if I'm taking out some of the more expensive cards. Mirrodin Crusader is one that I really underestimated and didn't believe that it was Legacy playable until recently. It beats Tarmogoyf and Abrupt Decay, and when you put a sword on it, it's a powerhouse. Do not cut this card. This is a great card, especially if your opponents are playing decks like Shardless. Flicker Wisp is one of the more difficult cards to play. Flicker Wisp basically allows you to blank your opponent's removal by removing your creatures in response. It also lets you improve your mana denial plan. I've been able to tap down people's lands with ports, flash in a Flicker Wisp during their upkeep, removing their land from the game until the end turn, and it blanks an entire turn for them. It's kind of like getting a time lock. And you're a mid-range deck, you probably do not have the long-term game, and you often just need a turn to finish your opponent off. This is a great quick trick for doing that. Cataclysm sees a lot of people's sideboards. We've got a little bit slower meta here in the Seattle area. I'm playing it main deck. Against mid-range decks, this shuts them down. You get to keep a piece of equipment and a creature and a land, or I often end up keeping Ether Vial so that I can continue to put threats out. I would strongly consider main decking this if you are in a slower Legacy environment. Stoneforge Mystic is a powerhouse. This is one of the few cards that was banned in Standard with an emergency ban. It's not just Stoneforge Mystic here that is so powerful. It's the combination that Stoneforge has with Batterskull to be able to sneak Batterskull in and shut down aggro decks. Additionally, this is one of the best cards against combo because it gets you a really fast clock out there by getting a piece of equipment and speeding up your game. It doesn't directly interact, but it makes them go off faster. Finally, it's ideal against counter spells. If you can get this out with an Ether Vial and then get the equipment out, you've gotten around their counter spells and have a real threat on the board. As you draw more equipment later in the game, you're able to put more threats out. Now we're moving on to some of the artifacts here. Fire and Ice is a current MVP in this deck because it gives you card draw. There's so little card draw in this deck. It also increases damage significantly. It's 4 more points of damage, and 2 of that can be targeted at your opponent's creatures or their planeswalkers after you do damage to somebody's face. I really like this card. This is a card that I would not cut in the equipment suite ever. Jitte is amazing. Life gain, board control, the ability to do extra damage and increase your clock. MVP in this deck. Batterskull shuts down your aggro decks. It also plays really well against control decks. The 3 mana to return it makes it very, very difficult for your opponent to destroy also. Ether Vials are at the heart of this deck. Ether Vial provides a significant boost in speed. It also helps you get around counter spells. This deck heavily relies on Ether Vials. Learning the timing of this card is also very important. you activate the card, give your opponent a chance to respond with something like a Stifle before showing them the card that you're putting into play. Occasionally, you can even activate this card, give your opponent the chance to respond with Stifle when you have only a land in hand and they're worried about the threat, so they'll Stifle it. Playing this card is more skill intensive than people realize. Very, very good card. I would definitely leave one of these at 3 and put the other one at 2 if you have multiple out. Mangara is another really, really powerful card in this deck. At first, it looks like you're just getting a 3 casting cost Swords to Plowshare, but the important part here is the card that I've got directly in the land section here, Karakas. And I'm playing the full 4 Karakas. Now, the reason this combos so well together is that the effect of removing him is after the colon. So you can activate his ability, target one of your opponent's permanents, return him to hand, and the effect is still going to happen. I think if this card was created under a modern template, you would, instead of having the remove him after the colon, you would have it before the colon. The reusable effect here, when combined with Karakas, is what makes this a powerhouse. Let's spend a second and talk about Karakas. This was a card I was really, really depressed to get in packs when I opened packs as a kid. And the reason was that Legends were terrible at the time. Over time, Wizards has created so many good Legend cards that this is an absolute must in this deck. It's a very difficult card to get around. If I was going to build this deck on a budget and start to upgrade it, this would be the first card of the land suite that I upgraded into because the utility is so good. Keeps your Legends alive, and it also shuts down Show and Tell. I've even used it against Tassigurs to return them to your opponent's hand. Very, very good land. I'm running 4 right now. Some people run 3, but when I want one, I really, really want one. And I'm okay having 2 of them in hand because they often get wastelanded. This deck plays basic lands and a significant number of them. It helps you with your wasteland, Stifle decks, because you're going to be able to cast spells. These particular planes are my favorite planes. They come from the APAC sets. These lands were handed out in boxes of 4th edition, I believe, in the Asia Pacific countries, and they have historic places on them. So Great Wall of China, Ayers Rock. We've got a sunflower field there. They're just beautiful artwork. The next card that we've got here is Rishadan Port. It is probably the weakest of the lands. It works really well in the mana denial strategy. It also helps you deal with cards like Mishra's Factory or heavy land decks. Very, very good card. Remember to use it during your opponent's upkeep to shut them out of land, or wait until the end of their turn to tap down a land, and then tap down a land on your turn if you're trying to deny them blue sources to counterspell you. Wasteland's another card that is at the heart of this deck. I've got some budget alternatives coming up for it, but mana denial helps significantly. You are a mid-range deck. You're going to want to deny your opponent mana. When to play this is also really important. You want to watch out for your opponent's Stifles. Definitely recommend picking these up after the Karakas as the next best land if you're upgrading. Cavern of Souls is another amazing card. You're often naming humans in this deck. Occasionally, you will name other things. I would play all 4 of these. It helps your counterbalance matchup significantly. Great card. Very, very, very powerful. If you don't have these, I would pick them up now. Long term, this is going to be a playable card in Vintage, Modern, and Legacy. I can only see this card going up over time. Horizon Canopy is in here as a singleton. Some people play 2. It's a way to get a little bit of card draw, and I do have 1 green card in my sideboard, a creature, who can be cast off the Cavern of Souls or off the Ether Vials also. I would consider playing 2 of these in this deck. It's a very, very good additional land for you. It's also the only land that you take damage from. This deck is very good at preserving your life total. Moving next into the sideboard. I'm still working on the sideboard. This is the roughest part of the deck. Rest in Peace is very, very good against Dredge. We've got Grafdigger's Cage in here also, and Containment Priest. Containment Priest is a bit of a nombo. I'm not running this main deck. If you've got a lot of show and tell and a lot of Dredge in your local meta, I would consider running it main deck. Pithing Needle is a very nice card for shutting down people's activated abilities. Flicker Wisp will probably come out of the sideboard here and go into the main deck. I really like this card. Incredible utility. Aethersworn Canonist helps shut down combo decks. Very, very good card. And as you'll notice in this sideboard, a lot of these are artifacts so that you can go get them, or enchantments. The Enlightened Tutor acts as an extra copy of each of those and plays very well with hand destruction as it puts it on the top of your deck. Your opponent thought seizes you. In response, you go get the answer you need to crush their deck and put it on top of yours. Sunlance is very good removal for the ultra-fast decks. Council's Judgment is very good removal for the control decks. This is a way to get rid of Jace or to get rid of True Name Nemesis. Another Revoker here. The decks that Revoker shuts down, you want multiple copies. Gaddock is my only green card. I may up him to 2 copies in the sideboard. He does help significantly with your show and tell that plays Omniscience. Outside of that, he stops Jace and a few X spells like Mavericks, Green Sun Zenith. Stonecloaker is a personal favorite tech for helping shut down Dredge and Snapcaster Mages. Also helps you beat removal. Weirding Crusaders here for the bug matchup. And I've got 2 timely reinforcements here. Most people don't play these. We've got a lot of burn and aggro in the local meta, and this is the best anti-burn card out there. Moving on to budget options for this deck. If you don't have Stoneforge Mystics, look at picking up each of the equipment directly. Elspeth is a really nice forecaster that is very reasonable right now. And Blade Splicer works really well with the rest of the Flicker theme. Budget lands are one of the more difficult things to find here. Dust Bowl and Ghost Quarter are both very nice options. Budget lands are one of the most difficult things to find. I would play multiple Dust Bowls and Ghost Quarters in this deck if I didn't have the Ports and Wastelands. Ghost Quarter is often as good. One of the biggest challenges to making a budget version of this deck is what do you replace the land with? Dust Bowl and Ghost Quarter are 2 great options that help shut down your opponent's lands. Ghost Quarter is often as good or better than Wasteland as it hits basic lands. Abance is a card that sees very little play. If you're in a heavy combo environment, it's great, and it's also a cantrip. It's really a version of Silence that you can main deck because of the cantrip ability on it. Aven Mind Sensor is one of those cards I would consider increasing in the main deck, and Stonecloaker, as I mentioned, is a great card that nobody sees coming. Stoneforge Mystic is one of the most difficult cards to come up with alternatives for in this deck. Steel Shaper's Gift is one of the few things that I could think of as a possible alternative. It's definitely weaker, but it's very good. There's also a quest in white that lets you put pieces of equipment directly into play and attached to your creatures. I played it in combo decks for a while, having a very fast aggro curve. I think it's a little too slow for Legacy, but it might be worth giving a try. If you've got any alternative answers for Stoneforge Mystic in here, things that you could put in this in a budget alternative, please let me know in the comments. I'd appreciate it. Thanks. This has been Brian Rowe with Mythic MTG Tech. We've got 20 amazing Commander artifacts coming up here in the next day or 2. Thank you to everybody who's over there on Patreon. I greatly appreciate it. This deck tech is a result of Patreon specifically. Monthly deck techs will happen because we reached the $100 goal on Patreon. Thank you guys so much. If you want to see more content, supporting the channel on Patreon is a great way to do that.